Darren, how are you doing?
Yeah, very well, thanks, Colin. Feeling really well at the moment. We're just starting to go into summer, so it's getting warmer and swimming season started. So that is very refreshing after being in lockdown for 8 weeks now. We have been in New Zealand.
Yeah. So, well, we're both in the southern hemisphere, so Brazil also. We're going into summer. It's getting hot out in the streets of Brazil again.
Yeah.
I don't miss the cold water of New Zealand, I have to say. Quite enjoy this slightly refreshing temperature in Brazil. But yeah, so here we are again.
Yeah, well, it's interesting with you being in Brazil, because this topic today of looking at these stone circles, which is a phenomena really, because they exist all over the world in countries and societies not related to each other. So it's a whole mystery in its own right. But of course, living in Brazil, you've got quite a few there in South America, haven't you, that you've actually visited?
Yeah, when I took off from New Zealand and traveled the world, I was very pleased to visit a few stone circles. And you're right, this is the theme for today, to really talk about, to try to bring another understanding idea to what was going on with these stone circles, because they, as you say, they're all through the world. And Brazil really is quite a young country. It doesn't have a very ancient, that kind of ancient something went on here history. But right across the border there in Peru, yeah, for sure. I mean, it's full of literally hundreds of enigmatic spots and sites and so on. There's a few stone circles there, but of course, much more actual temple arrangements and site arrangements, as well as the stone circles. But the stone circles are a particularly enigmatic one, because it's the same essential configuration that suddenly popped up around the planet in the same period of time, most of them about 3 to 2000 BC. And, you know, just in the UK alone, in the British Isles, there's apparently about 1,300 circles. And, you know, it might be less impressive if they're just kind of like little blocks sort of arranged on the floor, you know, on the ground. But we know there are sites where they weigh up to, in the case of Stonehenge, the most famous one, some of those central stones up to 50 tons.
Yeah.
And so we kind of want to try to come at it from a slightly different angle, which is trying to bring in the perception of what might have been going on from an electrical standpoint, from an unseen world's energy standpoint, because it's part of what we study is the human electromagnetic field and the planet's electromagnetic field as like an essential part of personal development, and trying to bring different threads together. Because the statement at the moment, if you look up stone circle Wikipedia, it'll tell you that the archaeologists don't know what they were for. There's really two theories, which is that they're either what do you call it, astrological calendars, like a type of calendar, or just used for ceremonies. But it doesn't explain much. I mean, first of all, if you just wanted a calendar, if you wanted something to measure cosmic alignments and timings, you wouldn't need something that heavy. You wouldn't need to transport the stones from hundreds of kilometers away, as in the case of Stonehenge. And if it was just for ceremonies, same thing. How come suddenly across the world people are making that arrangement for ceremonies? How do they all know? I mean, was somebody, you kind of get this impression of somebody sort of traveling around the planet saying, you know, make a stone circle. Hear ye, hear ye.
Yeah,
the mayor has decreed. The king of the earth.
It's trending. Be in on it while it's hot. But
Yeah,
and that's the thing too, isn't it, Colin? That you know, we say stone circles, but when they analyze those stones, they're always very, very specific type of stone, and often come from miles away because that stone's not local to the area. And it's almost like there's a kind of a lost science and technology that was going on there, you know, and as you say, just throw some stones together if you want to line it up with when the equinoxes are or when the sun will be rising in spring. Why go to all that trouble to have a specific type of stone?
Yeah. Yeah, so we want to put on the coffee table, if we're sitting at a coffee table, kind of scribbling with some diagrams and notes, we want to put down the idea of some other, I think, amazing explanations of what might have been going on, what we believe was going on, and therefore there's a relevance in that to the present time as well, like our lives now. Because I think people look at these things and they think, well, it's a little bit mysterious, but it's got really nothing to do with me, you know. And I went to Stonehenge when I was in England, and it's difficult because you're not even allowed in, and that's fine. I know they're trying to preserve it and all that, but there's no chance of really getting the impact. If there was some sort of arrangement there to cause a state or an effect electrically, you don't have much chance of having that experience by looking from the outside, you know, because you're not actually going into the arrangement. It's the same with the pyramids. You know, there's so many tourists going in and out most of the time that it's very hard to get a real feel, because, and I had it in Peru too, to really have some sense of what might have been going on there and have some sort of activate to some degree. If it's like a transistor radio, to kind of get the signal activated again, you've got to really separate out from that massive tourist, because that's all energy as well, right?
Yeah, no, and you know, there was such a really important point in the video to do with connecting with nature and entering into a forest. That whole process of slowing down and tuning in to the energy or the residue energy that's there. And yeah, so those stones in the positions that they are still carry that frequency of why they're placed exactly and the material they're made out of. But you know, it's very hard to get a sense of that when you're in a busload of tourists that have just arrived and they're hurrying you through like cattle, because the next busload's coming. Like the forest, whatever's there in the unseen worlds will retreat. It won't be at its prime.
Yeah, absolutely. So there's a kind of premise. There's a kind of premise that we are considering the subject from, to do with the stone circles. That again, if you try to understand it from where we are now, looking back to that time, it's very hard to understand, because it just looks like a physical construct, and it would be a little bit like somebody coming from the past and looking at a phone that didn't have a battery in it. Doesn't matter how much you pondered it, you could only have theories, right? If you came from the 15th century, you'd only have theories about what the heck this thing is if there was no battery in it, because it just simply is not activated and working. And one way of considering this, the plethora of stone circles around the planet all at the same time, is that bit like the seasons changing. You know, we mentioned going into summer, but after summer, of course, then there's going to be the autumn, and then there's the winter. So the states change on the planet. We know that because there's a smaller cycle, but there's a lot that points to bigger cycles, that there are bigger changes. And there's so much that points that back in time. There's so many things that point to a time in the distant past where there was some kind of charge or power present on the planet that, you know, the Greeks refer to the golden age. You know, the Bible refers to a time when people lived for 1,000 years. And all around the planet, there was this time when people interacted more with the gods and the angels and the fairies and all this type of thing. And there seems to be a lot to say that around 5000 BC, whatever that previous state had been, that this charge and whatever that caused with people, which will be another whole conversation of suppositions and considerations, it started to drop, a bit like autumn. It starts getting cold. It's a bit like your battery on your phone starts showing, you know, you're running down. And if people felt that, and if they were were detecting this charge lessening and the potential effects of that. Is it possible that these constructs of the stone circles were made to put the phone back into the charger, at least for a couple of thousand years? In other words, to try to preserve a charge. Because if there was a charge all through, let's say you take the Salisbury Plain where Stonehenge is, if there was a constant charge of energy across that plain, why do you need a Stonehenge? Just walk into the field and you're going to pick up that charge, right? But the fact that in Peru, in Spain, in Senegal, in Mongolia, they've found these stone circles all through the planet. The fact that they create this isolated area of stones says that they're trying to compact, they're trying to intensify, trying to maintain some sort of charge in a particular spot so that there wasn't a general leaking out of energy. In some ways, the idea was picked up on with churches, because if you think, if God is everywhere, why do you need to go into a church? Yeah. Why can't you just be walking around? But they somehow the notion that there is some help needed. This is kind of the idea. There's help was needed. We need to go into a specific area where the energy is compacted because the general conditions are getting weak. So it's kind of like going into a home, you know, if things are getting cold, you go into a home and you've got central heating or a fire or something.
And that was the thing with, because a stone circle or a church, it's some kind of man-made structure that can house energy. And there was an English man that he fell asleep on a hill. I think it was in Avonbury or somewhere like that, and he had this vision of all these energy lines crisscrossing the planet, connecting up all the churches and cathedrals. Yeah. And I think he was a dowsing expert, or he had friends that were, and so they checked out this theory. And it turns out that, you know, the majority of major churches and cathedrals are built on where these ley lines crisscross across the planet, and I believe Stonehenge does as well. So some people have analogized it to almost like acupuncture, where a human has these natural meridian points where energy's concentrated or crisscrosses, and you know, they can, using a special acupuncture needle, and sometimes they're silver, they can, you know, tweak those energies or concentrate them or disperse them if they're too concentrated. And sometimes the needles they used in the past were silver. So there's this whole technology of tuning and balancing energy in the human system. And I think that this energy technology to do with the planet and the stone circles may have well had a similar function, because they were so important, not just to the individuals, but in those ancient times, people saw them, you know, the planet as a living entity and an energetic being that they were harmonized and tuned in and part of. So these things were considered to be very, very important. Where, you know, I believe at Stonehenge, you see all these lovely photos of it, but there's a big motorway that goes just past it, doesn't it? You know, you don't normally see that shot. So no consideration about sacred energies or power points on the planet.
Well, like the pyramids, you know, on the Giza Plateau, the photos are always taken of seeing the desert side behind, but on the other side, there's the city of Cairo with 20 million people and all that pollution. So yeah, so much for the sacred energies. But yeah, Stonehenge is the most famous one, and yet, you know, there's I would love to have a few years free and a suitcase full of money just to go traveling and visiting all these other hundreds across the UK, but in other countries as well. When I was traveling, I was able to spend some time in the middle of some stone circles that are not so popular, because it's only Stonehenge that has that whole tourist setup around it. But there's quite a few others. There's many others that there's nobody there, so you can get there, you can approach, you can sense things and what might have been going on there. So you're right. First of all, like the meridians, like there's a line, like there's a meridian line in acupuncture. But then there's points where they put the needle in. So there's a line, but there's also specific like power points, and that's where they stick the needle in. But with the meridians, it's when they or with the ley lines or dragon lines, as they call them in the East, it's where there's several lines cross over and form like an intersection. Right. So the power is up at that spot. But then if you think what they're doing is by sticking the stones in the ground, they are conducting energy up from the earth. And then a stone is like it's a crystal, right? It's a mineral, so it holds force. So now you've got an area that's already the intersection of several ley lines. It's a closed space, so something you can gather in the middle. It's got this force coming up from the earth and anchoring in the stones themselves, which, as you say, will be a certain type and certain dimension. And then you've got all the alignments with the sun coming up in a certain position and stars over here. So all flowing into the center of this structure. And this is some of the more elaborate ones, of course, like Stonehenge. And I think, you know, how important was getting this charge to the people of that time. It might seem interesting to us, but for them to go to the effort of arranging such a power charging point for people, they saw it as an absolutely serious business.
Well, and the thing too, I think that's such an important point and analogy about we're looking at something in our time that, you know, like a television or a mobile phone it's actually not connected and plugged in, because like when you say with the phone, it's not just the power that charges the battery, but you need to have a whole cell phone network. You need servers, internet providers. It's a whole complicated system just so you can get a message from your mum on your phone and reply. So like with the pyramids in Egypt, you know, the polished white limestone is missing off the outside. The gold cap at the very top is missing. Yeah. So they literally deactivate. And interesting enough, still so potent, even though they're deactivated. So we don't know often how far those stone circles go back, because it's very hard to date stone, because someone's quarried it from a quarry, could have been there for millions of years. And then they've constructed this. So, you know, normally dating those sites is, you know, burnt wood that they've made a fire and cooked stuff with, seashells that are being brought from the ocean. They've got to find other seeds and pollens. They've got to find other factors to try and date it. So we really don't know what else was part of that machine that's now deactivated and not in regular use. You know, we really are looking at the bare bones of something which is still potent and still carries a frequency and a nature to it.
Yeah, you got to imagine the people back at that time, like farming and doing whatever they're doing, and some local guy, local magician or priest or whatever says, well, we're going to need to set up a stone circle here, and they say, fine, we can do that. And he goes, yeah, the stones are going to weigh 25 tons each, and they need to be taken from a spot from hundreds of miles. I mean, there's going to be a rebellion on your hands, right? I mean, who's going to agree to do that unless there was a collective understanding of the importance of it? And I think the how of it we can't even get into as possibilities in this conversation. But I think the why of it is there's plenty to still sort of consider in the why of it still. Because the how is really enigmatic. Because 25 tons, you know, that main circle of stones around Stonehenge, for example, most of the stones are about 20 to 25 tons. But to put that in perspective, an average car weighs about 2 tons. So, you know, imagine you and I going outside and saying, well, we want to pick up this car and just hoist it a few meters down the street. If you've ever tried to lift the car with a friend, you know, it's not easy. You see these protests, people trying to turn over a car and there's a whole gang and they're all humping and bumping and they can't get the car over. You know, it's very hard to turn a car over. That's just 2 tons. An elephant, like an African elephant, weighs about 4 tons. So now you've got a 20-ton block, and I think there's about 30 of them in the circle, the main large outer circle. So you're talking about, if a car is 2 tons, you're talking about 15, a pile of 15 cars. Then you call all your farmer friends over. You know, it's all on a kind of platform. All right, ready? 1, 2, 3, lift. You know, it just doesn't make sense. Then you got these like lintel stones on the top.
Yeah.
They're not quite as heavy, but still extremely heavy, that were lifted up and put in position, because that was important as well. And those are the outer stones. There's 5 big stones in the center, Trilothon Stones they're called. And these ones, this arrangement of 5, these ones are around 50 tons.
Wow.
It's an incredible weight. And again, positioned very, very specifically. And we don't know the effect of, like you say, of having the arrangement in place, but also what was going on at that time with a greater charge in the air that might have like drawn energy into that particular spot.
Yeah, or
so, yeah, go on.
And even the effect that it might have had on gravity. You know, these giant brontosauruses, the dinosaurs that they, you know, reconstruct from bones in the past. One of the real curios that they have no answer to is that with the brontosaurus, because they're one of the tallest and had the longest neck, with the gravity at the level it is today, they wouldn't have been able to lift up their neck, let alone move. So,
right.
You know, we take it for granted with our modern education that the laws of physics are going to be forever and always have been. And, you know, there have been experiments done to show that, you know, even the so-called constant of the speed of light has a variation. So we don't know what the energy was like at the time. And like even in ancient Rome, where a Roman legion would march a whole day, have a battle, win, and march home again. These stories of superhuman feats of strength and endurance. And, you know, I believe it's because they had a greater charge and energy that humans were connected to at the time. And even with the cathedral building, like Chartres Cathedral, you know, it's recorded that everybody was involved, helping move stones and pushing carts, and even nobles and princesses. And that was because they all felt united in the absolute importance and vitality of this structure, because with their religious views and sentiments at the time, they believed it was really, really important, not just for this life on earth, but for the afterlife. And so, you know, I cannot think of an example where you're looking at ancient cultures that built stone circles that time in history, that it just wasn't considered the normal idea that life in physical form was temporary, that what it was all about was the afterlife. And I think, you know, that's why these things must have been so important. And they went to such enormous lengths to create those things, because it wouldn't have been easy. It's a massive operation.
Isn't it funny that, you know, we still, if you think about energy, everybody knows we need energy to function. You know, in the minimum level, we eat an apple, you know, we drink some water, we breathe in deep, but all of that in the end has been converted to energy.
Yep,
and what the ancients seem to understand, that we've somehow kind of lost along the way, is that the idea of plugging directly into channels of energy. In fact, the electricity we get into our homes is doing just that. It's sucking energy out of the atmosphere and conducting it down the power lines. But it's going into all these, you know, equipment and computers and into the house, which is fine. But what about into us? You know, people are feeling depleted, lackluster, and, you know, this structure of Stonehenge is particularly interesting because these 5 stones in the middle it seems to be, and from my time in Peru, most of the sacred places have a kind of approach system. So let's say it really was maximum charge in the center. And so these 5 stones are in a kind of semicircle, and there's a spot in the center. Let's say that spot in the center is maximum charge, 100% potency. Most of these places have concentric circles. So there's an approach system that you're adjusting as you go towards that central spot. In other words, if it was for real, as we're supposing it was, for me, I really am 100% sure this was the case, having been into these spots around the world. They are allowing the person to adapt as they're approaching. Don't know how long they spent at each level, but they're adapting to a level of force and conductivity at each level on their way to the central spot. It's a bit like a mountaineer climbing a mountain. They have camps at different levels, and one of the reasons is not just to rest, but to adapt, to let the system get used to the lack of oxygen at that level. They know the body needs to adapt to those different pressures.
Yeah, acclimatize, and it's the same with levels of energies. Yeah,
to levels of energy. So the idea of going from 0 or 10%, let's say a person lives at 10%, into the center of Stonehenge as 100% is too much. So you'd spend time in Peru. They would have like stone gateways, and even after all these years, one side of the gateway, you could feel there was a lesser conductivity to passing through the gateway. So there was something about that block frame. If you stand in it for a moment, it's a bit like in those submarines where they have a chamber, where the water fills up or the water runs out, and the person's got time to adapt. And it's so interesting, because you think if that was really going on, they understood that the human needs to have a concentrate of energy. It should have more charge. It should have more power. And somehow we kind of instinctively know that. People know that they want to feel something. They want to have a certain breeze or force or charge running through their system. And it's normally translated just as emotion, emotion, energy motion. So everybody's looking for an emotion that makes them feel good, makes them feel better, makes them feel a meaning to life, right? But if you can get into that situation, there's energy motion being conducted through and in and anchoring in one of those stone circles.
Yes.
It's a very real charge up, just as we do with our phones, but with the actual natural system.
Yeah, and I think that's why at one level these circles and monuments are, lined up to the solstices and the movements of the stars. But see, that brings in the whole consideration of timing. And, in our modern time, timing's about being at the right place at the right time, or getting your taxes in on time. It's a very heavy sort of schedule. But this is where the deeper astrology comes into it. So, we have these really interesting stories when the Spanish Armada was invading England. And there's a story of Sir Walter Raleigh and his men playing bowls up on the hill, and they could see the Spanish Navy, and it's kind of held up in modern times as how brave and heroic and bold they were. They weren't going off to the battle till it suited them. But, the esoteric knowledge and history inside of Elizabethan England, that they were waiting for a planetary alignment so that the power was right to go and attack. And, part of how they won that battle was that the weather changed, and the Spanish Armada was blown off course, because with sailing ships, you've only got so much control over where you're going. So this whole idea of the timing of something to be at a maximum power point or a maximum potency. So, the idea of connecting to energy, inducting energy in, it like anything, because energy always works by modulation and frequency. So there's always peaks and troughs. And I think that's part of the technology of these circles, because it was a containment and it was lined up, that you would know when were the best times for conducting those ceremonies and for connecting to more potent energies from not just the planet, but from the rest of the cosmos as well.
Yes, and it's amazing the idea of compacting energy. Like in Peru, there was quite a lot of the temples had a sort of small space that were like meditation chambers.
Right.
And if you think about the pyramids as well, there's these king's chamber and queen's chamber, and they're relatively small compared to the size of the pyramid itself. So you get this idea of concentrate. You know, we know that something concentrate has more intensity and potency. Something dispersed, that loses the potency. So you think of all of Salisbury Plains, and then there's this one little concentrated area. And it does make you wonder that without that understanding, and with so many distractions in the modern times, you know, so much you can kind of spend your energy on and direct your attention to, you know. In Buddhism, the main training, there's a particular story I like, the student asking the master, the Zen master, what is it all really about? And he writes on the board, attention. And he goes, okay, but what's it really all about? I got that. Right. He writes under it, attention. And he says, yeah, I see your point, but there must be some other deep meaning to the whole thing that we're doing with Buddhism. And he said, yes, there is. And he wrote attention again. The thing about attention is energy flows along the lines of our attention.
That's right.
So
yes,
there's so many things we can disperse with today to lose energy. And it's difficult to imagine walking into a stone circle. There's no other distractions. The whole thing has been arranged to increase potency as you approach that center piece. And it's very interesting, these 5 large 50-ton stones, Trilothons they're called, because we ourselves are a 5-fold arrangement. So it's almost like they knew.
Yeah.
And I'd love to go in there to detect, but I'm sure you'd find that each of those stones is tuned to one of our 5 power systems, which we'll talk about some other time, of course. You know, the Chinese medicine knew it, the importance of the harmony of these 5, but that's just for maintenance. You know, when you think about something like acupuncture, it's really just to keep the person healthy at a basic planetary level. You wouldn't need a Stonehenge, you wouldn't need all these stone circles if it was just basic maintenance. They were obviously trying to catch something that was an extra force from beyond the type of well-being you feel walking on the field or in the forest.
Yeah, and isn't it amazing how these things echo or reappear later in history? Because you're describing there a pentagram inside a circle, and you look at Leonardo da Vinci's very famous Vitruvian Man. It's the pentagram human inside a circle. Now, the thing about that's so amazing, why he did that was not just to be clever, had a very practical application. He was looking for a system of proportions that you could then create architecture that would be in harmony with the universe and the natural worlds, figuring, and I think this goes back to ancient Egypt as well, that whatever naturally created the human, those forms and shapes and links and measures, if you built something to that, like a tuning fork principle, it would resonate and harmonize, not only to, because that's one of the things about Renaissance architecture, it got smaller because the idea was the human could relate to it. Before that, big cathedral, I mean, they had another purpose, but part of the effect was to make you feel very small and insignificant. Where Renaissance, it was to do with, you know, really the human being the microcosm of the universe. And so to build architecture and incredible artwork, all tuning in on that. And talk about energy, because wherever you see great creativity and produce, I mean, Leonardo is a good example, but the whole Renaissance was like that. The books, the artwork, the architecture, the music, I mean, there was almost nothing going on by comparison in the Dark Ages. And you just get this flourishing. You start seeing artwork with halos painted on them. And as you know, the pineal gland gets activated and the human goes into a higher frequency of energy. The halo is one of the things that turns up in the aura. So, obviously they got it right. They tuned in, they harmonized, they were able to capture the force and the energy, new force and energy that had never been before coming in. So, even that attitude of having a structure set up where you're constantly, if you like, checking month by month, year by year on what kind of energy is coming out of the universe, because we want to be plugged in. We don't want to miss out. It's important for our development.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. This era really explodes, Darren. This idea that there was a conductivity in the distant past. About 5000 BC to 3000 BC, it started to drop. And it's funny you mentioned the term the Dark Ages, because what seems to have happened is even before the advent of Christ, there was a drop in the conductivity, right from the Roman era through, even though they were still using some residual charge to go marching about and conquering the earth, something flattened, something panned out, and that conductivity was gone. Because one of the last stories that really seems to point to conductivity still is the whole thing with the Ark of the Covenant. There's some sort of power there, the Temple of Solomon, some sort of power anchored still. But after that, it just gets weaker and weaker and weaker, except for one or two saviors here and there. The technology of loading power into people, not as faith and belief, but as an actual charge, seems to have gotten lost right through until there was a kind of like a bit of a kickstart in the Renaissance period. Something seemed to start waking up. But like the Greek phoenix idea, it's taken another 500 years for another kickstart, because I believe in the 60s, people started feeling a slight charge starting to come back. And just like if you're watching those little bars on yourself, when you write down to 1 and you're so happy to see 2 and 3, it feels like a charge has been building. A lot of people are detecting it. And so if that's the case, we're going to go straight past that phase of the Stonehenge thing and the hinges around the world to a recharge. So we're not on backup power, we're on a course of recharge, but that opens up a whole batch of questions that we can talk about in another conversation. Just before I forget, the word hinge is an interesting one, because it comes from hinge, which we know from the doors, right? So if you think of a door won't move unless you have a hinge. Yeah. And so the idea that those places are doorways to something is an amazing thought.
Yeah, and this thing about the increasing energy, I've listened to a number of people recently in the last few months, just on internet chats and videos, talking about how they've done things like give up drinking coffee because the energy they feel flooding into the earth at the moment, they're like that anyway. They don't need coffee. Just this general energizing. And I think, that's the thing, because this is a lovely thing about natural laws. It explains so many things. So because the way energy moves, if you're increasing, you're turning up the knob and increasing energy, it still works by waves, but each crest gets higher than the one before. So, this explains why it just doesn't go boom like that.
Wow. Right.
And I've done this because I love going to the beach. You count the waves, and every 7th one is the biggest one, and then it goes. So whether the tide's coming in or going out, you still have this amplitude effect of the waves and the cycle increasing. And as you know, a big wave at the top of the series will really knock you over, where the smaller one you'll hardly notice.
Yeah, and again, the clues with these stones, because if they considered it that important that they would put these stones weighing tons into position and then have a pentagrammic conductive arrangement, they understood that it was necessary to have balance and to build up gradually by that approach system. Generally, you'll either find something that indicates a 5-fold arrangement or a 7, because there's another 2 features where basically a planetary pentagrammic arrangement, 5 fingers, 5 parts to the system. But there's also another 2 centers that we can, or centers of power that we can engage in, which are silver and gold, which we can again talk about another time. Or you get a 12-fold thing, which is the zodiac thing.
Yes.
They found a stone sort of area of some sort of stone arrangement of like some sort of community off the coast of a place called Atlit in Israel. So divers found it, so underwater off the coast. And down there near these structures is this stone circle. And it's got 7 standing stones. And so you often get like 7 in Moray in Peru. There's a place called Moray or Moray. There's these concentric circles going down to a central area, but there's always 7 going down. So when I was there, instead of just rushing down, again, just conditioning at each level, approaching the center, if you give it a little time, by the time you got down to the center, as an example, we did it with a shaman who had been there hundreds of times through her lifetime. But because we gave it time to have effect, when we got down to the center, we were also charged electrically that she was on her knees weeping because she had never felt it before, because she was just used to rushing in and rushing out. And I think one of the ideas in what we're saying that's useful is the idea to not just be rushing about, but give a little time to let whatever's coming into the planet now, if there is a recharge, to let that recharge occur, but also that you need some sort of magnetic space. You need to create a space. We're so smart in the West, right, with our houses and homes, but in Thailand and many places around the world, they still have an area where there's a shrine, something dedicated to the gods, which is a kind of like a little reserved space for a spiritual process, never mind the church or temple at the end of the street. It was still given that, it still is given that sort of importance. And although it's largely symbolic today, I don't think it's a question of being symbolic. I think we need to have this enclosure, some sort of enclosure, even if it's mental enclosure. There's interesting, meditation, all these things coming over from the East in the last 30, 40 years. It's almost like people instinctively knowing we have to start paying attention to our electrical selves, and we need to reserve a little time and space for this type of process. But I'm not sure how much we know that it's preparation for something else that's coming that's going to really load the human system.
And I think there's another important significance of those stone circles and similar structures is that when they are aligned to the equinoxes and the solstices, I mean, you've got to really know what you're doing to be able to line that up so that's that exact.
Yeah.
And then this phenomenon of the precession of the equinoxes, where it appears that the zodiac signs are moving backwards through time. Now, that's 1 degree. It moves 1 degree every 72 years. So that, it's almost a lifetime or a generation, and it takes 26,000 years to cycle the full way around. So that's another very interesting thing. What is so important about what might be coming in the future that you'd have to be that accurate and want to know exactly where you were in time, not just planetary seasonal time, but really you're looking at galactic time. And, some of those South American temples and the whole court arrangement that, they're lined up at a certain point to align with the center of the galaxy. Now, if our solar system is orbiting around the center of the Milky Way, and we know how powerful the sun is, then, whatever's at the middle of the Milky Way that everything else orbits around must be an incredible power. So, I think you're having all of those levels in there, and obviously really tuning in with the planet and tuning in with its fundamental frequency. Because it's like playing an instrument in an orchestra. If you're out of tune and everybody else is playing, you're thinking, hey, mate, get in tune, you're ruining the thing. It's this being in tune, to be in tune with a greater harmony. It's
Yeah.
I mean, that was a thing in ancient China, and you talk about that period about 5,000 years ago. They had a system where they believed this was so important that humans and society were in tune with the rest of the universe, that they would, I'm not sure what the process was they had, but they'd work out what the fundamental note or tone was for that year or that period of time. And they would make a flute out of a pipe, because as you know, that length relates to musical pitch. So whatever the note was they came up with, then the length of that pipe would be used to set the measurements and weights throughout the whole of the country for that period of time.
Amazing.
And then all orchestras, all musicians would have to retune their instruments to the great note, so that anybody playing anything anywhere in China, that they would all be on that tune. And it was the idea, they thought that vibrations and frequencies was so important, because it was really how the whole universe worked, that music was really like a vibrational chemistry, and that it would either be enhancing to society as a whole or have the opposite effect. So, you know, this is a lost art and a lost technology now, but they actually once did this, where it was so important. It tuned in a whole nation to the frequency of and the note of that year, because it changes, it varies.
It's amazing, and it's a beautiful loop back to the idea of the hinges as well, the stone circles, because they say they're so often arranged to different cosmic alignments and equinoxes and solstices that they say there could have been a calendar. But if you think of that idea that you said, that they not only want to get a charge, as we're putting forward in this conversation, but it's the quality of the charge. It's one thing to be charged, you know, it's another thing that it's charged with the quality of energy. And the idea of that quality being something that's passing through the universe, passing through the galaxy, passing from the stars, is an incredible idea. When you think about the modern city that's just buzzing about with its own kind of, we've created our own little universe, and meanwhile these finer frequencies are still permeating. And it's not a static thing. We know the planet's flying through space along with the solar system. So there's new energies arriving. There's new forces arriving. It's not a rehash situation. No 2 Mondays are the same.
And quite literally, this is one of the things that's part of the times we're living in, is that you know, our entire solar system, where it is in the position in the galaxy, it's moved into an area where there's, you know, because they're picking this up, a much more intense cosmic radiation. You know, without the magnetic field and the Van Allen belts of the planet, we'd be fried just by normal cosmic radiation. But what they're saying is that such is the intensity of this new energy the solar system is moving into, that it's affecting the whole solar system. So like on Jupiter, they're having auroras like we have on Earth in the North and the South Poles. It's never been seen before. And that only happens because it's being energized with a greater energy than it normally is.
Darren, I thought maybe we could look at a few images of stone circles around the world. You know, images worth 1,000 words, pictures worth 1,000 words. And it really is, it's impacting for me every time to see the reality of this and to consider the importance they may have had for people at that time. So bring a few images up and we'll chat about them.
All right, excellent.
So there's Stonehenge, and it's interesting that the fascination it still has, right? I mean, it's never short on tourists. People flood there still. Makes you wonder if intuitively, at some level, people are drawn there, feeling that there's some relevance, there's some importance, even though the process can't happen as it should happen. And it's the same with a lot of these sacred sites around the world. I feel that people are attracted to them because they sense there's a potential there. Whether or not they can plug in and it can happen the same way is obviously very unlikely. I like this particular image. Again, the whole thing has been mostly dismantled or fallen into disarray, but you get an idea of the size of those stones with this picture.
Yeah.
And how difficult it would be to put that stone on the top. Really, it's possible, yeah, but you have to think, why make it so hard? Why make it so difficult? Why does it have to be so large? And again, the idea of how important this charge was, this energy charge. It's really extraordinary. The idea that they were preserving something that was weakening energy.
And people do say that, don't they, Colin? Not everybody, but there's a number of people when they go to that site, even with the crowd standing in it, that they feel a charge. They feel a particular kind of energy that fills them up when they're there that they don't feel somewhere else.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. And again, the idea of an enclosed space. Look at those fields beyond in this image, like kilometers of nothing. If it was able to be built anywhere, they could just build it closer to where the stones were quarried. But no, it had to be that far away. And there's a whole outer ring even further out from these stones that we're looking at here. And so there's a whole step-by-step process. You can see part of that in a fivefold arrangement there. But it would have been an incredible thing when it was actually in place and activated. It's impossible to imagine really today. And these dragon lines and ley lines would have been felt back at that time because, again, if there was not so much electrical pollution and distraction as there is today, people had a sensitivity. They were still able to sense radiations. It would have been so natural that it wouldn't need to be discussed. It would be obvious. It would be part of life. Today, things are flattened out to the point that if we feel energy, we'll mention it. We'll say, oh, I felt a charge. You know, there was something in the atmosphere. Or, funny, people will refer to atmospheres and energies in different places, but it's obviously very weakened compared to what this implies. And you think about tribes that would gather in circles. I mean, you could say the circles are practical form anyway, because you can look at each other and so on. But something else happens when you're in a circle. I mean, you know it from being on a campfire at a campfire with your friends. Something gathers in the middle, something magical. If you've ever been out, got to go off into the forest a little bit for number one, when you come back, you can feel this special atmosphere is building in the space where your friends are.
That's another thing about a circle too, with vibration and energy. If you at the local museum, there's a small round room with a vaulted ceiling. And if you go in there and hum, if you hit the right note, it just continues to reverberate around and around in this small chamber. So that is one of the natures of what a circle will do. It causes energy to continue to reverberate.
This photo here was in Peru. And of course, no tourists, no ticket. Very nice. You can actually try to detect what was going on there. But again, a lot of effort, even this being a small circle, smaller stones, a lot of effort to make the arrangement. And there's a kind of dip in the middle. And again, if you go in slowly and take your time at the edge and walking in, you can feel a different degree of charge in the center of this circle. This is a place called Colin in Scotland, and
yeah,
they obviously weren't too worried about the finesse of the finish of these stones. It's like they don't mind that they're not all squared off like Stonehenge. But the idea that there's a plug-in, a bit like an acupuncture needle, as you're saying, Darren. And so force is running up, and you'll get these, what they call standing stones, spotted along the ley lines. Just one stone sticking out the earth. There's a photo coming up of one of these. Because the main thing was that the energy was being conducted up and allowing the conductivity to accumulate.
It's amazing too, this fact of them being all over the world, because it's a bit like you can imagine in the future, people coming back and digging up modern archaeological sites and they say, oh, everybody had an airport, you know, or everybody had a power station. But when you see this, it's like, hey, everybody had one of these.
Yeah. This is one of the most intriguing to me. I'd love to visit this one in Scotland, called the Ring of Brodgar. I mean, it sounds like something out of Lord of the Rings, right?
Yeah.
It's 104 meters across. It's absolutely huge. There's a photo here of it.
Wow.
And it's the largest stone circle in the British Isles in the UK. And again, it's just there in the kind of nothing around it. Doesn't seem to be any rhyme or reason. Think how far it is away from everything else. But the people in that region they were compelled to set up a stone circle. And so there's definitely, again, the idea of holding energy, conducting and holding energy into a particular space, because they could just mark out a circle with a little stone. Yeah. But the larger the stone, the more anchor, right? The more power is going to be anchored. There's an aerial view. So you can see it's very remote.
Yeah, amazing.
But as you said a bit earlier, Darren, it's where it's the right spot where a certain number of ley lines pass. And it was detected. Even my name's Spenley. Ley comes from an area called Spen, and there was the ley of Spen.
Wow.
And so it was integrated even into there's a lot of surnames that have L-E-Y at the end, and it was to do with recognition of different leys in different areas. This is from an area of Brazil, Amapa, it's called. A little bit disorganized, but no comment. This one is intriguing. It's an aerial view of a stone circle in Australia. Actually, 2 stone circles with a kind of pathway between them.
Wow.
Yeah.
It's interesting that serpent dragon sort of shape connecting stone megaliths is quite common. In North America, they have one like that as well.
It's amazing to think there's obviously a kind of pathway between the stones, like an energy corridor. Makes you wonder if they're 2 different polarities on either end, but in any case, incredibly intriguing. South Africa, that's it. I mean, again, it didn't have to come out as news. People were detecting the drop of energy, and somehow they knew that if we want to conserve energy, this is the structure that does it. It seems like it's kind of like building a fire for warmth. Somehow that kind of minimum knowledge was available at that time. You get the single standing stones. This is called the bear down man. This is interesting because the idea is that a traveler walking through the fields could get a small charge up, keep his energies up as he walks along the ley line from place to place. And you can imagine a person getting there, putting their back up against the stone, charging, just like we plug a phone into a charger, ready for more activities. The stone circles on the border between France and Spain. It is intriguing why so many in that particular region of the planet, but you get the impression that each community, each people in different spots was becoming aware of this dropping conductivity and went to work as best they could, because this is no Stonehenge, but if it works to some degree, good enough for the local community.
Yeah.
This is, of course, one of the most amazing ones, Carnac in France, because there's over 3,000 stones arranged in straight lines and circles. So,
yeah, amazing.
Again, how important was it for these people? How important for the people of that time was this? And it kind of looks like you're looking at a motherboard of a computer, you know, that plaque inside a computer. There must be reasons why there were certain types of stone, the number of stones, the positioning.
And that's the thing too, that a lot of those stones used have a high crystalline substance inside of them. And you know, because I see what you say by motherboard, but I also think musical instrument, because it's almost like each stone's a different note, and when they're energized, they're going to give off a frequency and a vibe, but you've got a collective vibration and frequency there. You know, it's more complex than a simple stone circle where the energy goes round and round and is held. This is more like a transmissive kind of setup.
Sensitive people definitely feel energy there. They feel a charge. They feel that the stones have something. But again, it's like a residue as opposed to something activated and powerful at the time. Whereas when at that time, maybe you walk down the corridors of the stones, you go in with a 10% charge and you come out with 100%.
Yeah.
And it's funny because the idea is kind of left over into, the idea of church. You go on a Sunday, and the idea is you kind of get a recharge, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, your faith and your belief, everything's all charged up, and to see you through the week until next Sunday.
You see, something I meant to say before about the stone circles is that if you own a radio station, or in the old days with an analog radio station, you get a license to transmit a certain distance. So you could transmit over a 50-mile radius, and people could tune into your radio station. But if you got the next license up, and then you could transmit 100 kilometers from your radio station, you boost the signal. So you add more power and energy to boost the signal. And that's the thing about stone circles. One wonders if it was a twofold mechanism where one's holding and building energy, but that allows for a reception and transmission over greater distances. Because all of these ancient cultures, again, they talked about some kind of communication or connection outside of the planet.
Yeah.
As well as inside.
Yeah, that would be, you're absolutely right. I mean, same with the pyramids. It wouldn't be like absolutely everybody has to go into them. They would have certain people, representatives that would go in, that would be able to handle the charge.
Yeah.
Just like the idea of a priest standing at the altar and conducting. Interesting word, isn't it? Because conducting gives the idea of energy conduction. They're doing it really as a service to the greater community, to the greater number of people. Ireland, across the shores on islands, a place called Drombeg. Interesting how often they're just some remote spot, would seem to have no particular reasoning for that spot, except again, if there's an intersection of ley lines, there's a concentrated power. And this is really intriguing, this Naphtha.
Yes.
I mean, Egypt's already got enough mysteries to go on with, but even with the pyramids and the Sphinx and everything up the road, there in the middle of the desert, there's a stone circle. And you were saying something to me earlier about the alignment of the circle.
Oh, look, it's really, really interesting because, it looks a bit rough, but that depression that you see it in the desert, thousands of years ago, it wasn't a desert, and it was a seasonal lake. So all of those stones would be sitting out of a shallow lake of water. So at nighttime and in the desert, it's clear, there's no clouds, you'd have the perfect reflection of the stars above and below. So in terms of observing star movements and calculations, it aided that process. Wow. But one of the incredible things about it, and nobody knows who built it or why it's there, there's no dwellings or domestic temples or organizations around it. It's just the stone circle and some other structures. But the stones in the middle align with the constellation of Orion's belt perfectly at a certain time. But they also align with Orion's belt through the full precessional cycle of 26,000 years. It looks like this in the sky. And then when it gradually moves back over 26,000 years, it looks like it's angled that way in the sky, and it lines up with another 3 stones. So it has these 6 stones in the middle. And once again, how do you work that out? Why do you need to know that information so specifically? I mean, is this talking about timescales outside of this planet and important events, important cosmic events that have been in the past and are yet to come in the future, which I think it does personally.
Yeah, it really does. And it's incredible to think of these people tuned into these bigger cycles and understanding that we're part of waves and cycles at a cosmic level, and the idea of being tuned into that, whether or not your lifetime sees it through or not, that you're part of that occurrence. So
on that, that's a thing, all the fuss that was made about the Mayan calendar, and was it 2012 December 21st, the solstice?
Yeah.
And people predicted the end of the world and all the rest of it, but we're talking about changes in the unseen worlds and cosmic energies. And I would just say to anybody, think back to 2012. Are things different or not? Because they have. There's been a massive shift.
Yeah. Most people are feeling something accelerating and also feeling something's not quite right.
Yep.
And that's again, think of the idea of approaching one of these conductive stone circles gradually, or a sacred site. Think of the line of sphinxes before going into a temple in Egypt. You know, there was often, well, not often, there was always a conditioning process before the main event, let's say. This Göbekli in Turkey is incredible. Göbekli Tepe in Turkey, because that's totally enigmatic, the structure. And again, it'll never be solved unless the electrical aspect is taken into consideration. Again, like somebody finding a transistor radio, you know, a transistor radio appearing 500 years ago in somebody's house. They're just not going to work out what it's for. If it's got no batteries, it's got nothing, it's not being tuned into anything.
Well, the other thing, Colin, talk about deactivated. It was completely buried. You know, a farmer was plowing his field and hit a rock. He thought, what's this? He dug around a little bit, started finding all these structures. So whoever created that and used it, it had a function, and then completely buried, gone from history, completely whatever it was doing was no longer doing it.
Now they found another one called Karahan.
Yeah.
And again, this is much further back than the Stonehenge and the stone circles are attributed to. This is like 9,000 years ago. But the idea, again, of concentrating energy, of causing a compacted power pack force center, so that it would be extremely potent in the center, which again is the notion behind the pyramids, right? Pyramid, fire in the middle, pyre in the middle. So the idea of power in the center. And this is just one from Japan, just to show how widely spread this notion was, this impulse was to cause a stone circle, potency in the middle, preserve some force. There's no way this information could have got around the world without it just being picked up by the people in different lands by their own natural systems and knowing what they needed to do. So I'll stop share there. It's been quite a long one, but you were going to say something about tying this into...
Yes, Trail 2, for those who are interested on Ruby Mountain, that's called the Universal Laws in Big and Small. So we go into a lot more detail about these kind of phenomena, and really the unseen worlds and the electromagnetic phenomena behind them, which everything seems to come back to at the core.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, we better wind up. Again, a lot to consider, and it's really what these things imply, what they say about other things that is so interesting. And these stone circles are amazing because they're real, they're there, something happened. And I think dwelling on this area, it sort of brings it forward. It doesn't feel like some distant people, something not related to us, because this human fivefold energy system and the idea of conductivity, it's for all of us to get a grasp of and see the relevance now, because I feel the force is coming thick and fast.
For sure. Yeah, absolutely.
So let's remind people to subscribe and check out the Ruby Mountain channel, the Ruby Mountain website, if you haven't already.
Yeah, there's a lot more there to discover.
There really is. Darren, always good to talk to you.
Yeah, great, man. Yeah, really enjoyed that. So just opens up more, talk about Hinge, just opens up more doors to the miraculous and the amazing. Yeah, it's incredible.
All right, so we'll see you again soon.
Yeah, all right. See you, Colin.
Bye, Darren.
Bye.